The compass rose tattoo on her wrist was supposed to stay hidden forever, buried under long sleeves and 15 years of carefully constructed lies. But when the Mafia Boss grabbed her arm at the Manhattan Gallery and recognized the intricate pattern, identical to the brand his wife wore when she was murdered 3 months ago, her past detonated in a single heartbeat. "This mark got my wife executed," he said, his voice lethal as his security team closed in. "And you're going to tell me everything about St. Magdalene's Reform Institute and the Sanctum, or you'll be dead before morning because the people who killed Stephanie know you exist now." She couldn't breathe, couldn't think. Because the tattoo that had marked her as Subject 47, as merchandise for wealthy predators, had just made her either the key to exposing a decades-long trafficking conspiracy or the next body in a parking garage. The panic attack had hit me on the subway. 20 minutes of white-knuckled breathing exercises while commuters shot me annoyed glances. 15 years in this city. 15 years since I'd escaped the nightmare of St. Magdalene's Reform Institute and the people who'd made sure I'd never speak about it. And I still couldn't handle crowded spaces without my chest tightening. The warmth of the gallery wrapped around me like expensive wine. Soft lighting glinted off the white walls, casting everything in the minimalist glow that only contemporary art spaces could buy. The space was intimate, just a handful of collectors scattered among the installations and sculptures. Modern European, naturally. Low ambient music drifted from hidden speakers, mixing with the hushed conversations and the soft click of heels on polished concrete. I made my way past a Gerhard Richter piece, peeling off my blazer and draping it over my arm. My hands were still unsteady, the residual tremor from the attack refusing to fade. The gallery assistant gave me a subtle nod of recognition. I'd been here often enough in my role as associate curator at the Met that my presence raised no questions. That's what I'd built here. A life where I raised no questions. "Ms. Smothers?" The assistant appeared at my elbow, her black dress immaculate despite the evening hour. She looked me over with the practiced discretion of someone trained never to acknowledge discomfort. "The Kiefer installation is in the West Wing. Shall I bring you the provenance documentation?" "No need," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Just browsing tonight." She nodded once and glided away. I pressed my fingertips against the cool metal of a sculptural piece, trying to ground myself in something tactile, something real. The abstract forms stared back at me with modernist indifference. I'd spent so many years studying art like this, learning to read the meaning in every material choice and gesture, but I'd never learned to read the dangers in my own life until it was too late. My hand drifted unconsciously to my left wrist, fingertips brushing against the edge of my sleeve where the tattoo hid beneath the fabric. The circular compass rose intertwined with religious symbols had been there for so long I barely noticed it anymore. Matron Deborah had pressed the brand into my skin when I was 12 in the basement chapel of St. Magdalene's. "So they always know what you're worth," she'd whispered while I screamed. I never forgot, but I'd spent 15 years trying to. I reached for a champagne flute from a passing server, checking my reflection in the gallery's floor-to-ceiling windows. Just the motion of normalcy. Just the performance of someone who belonged here. What I didn't know was that the man who'd been hunting answers to his wife's murder had just walked through those doors. And in 60 seconds, my carefully hidden past would explode. That's when the atmosphere shifted. It wasn't dramatic, not at first. Just a subtle change in the energy of the room, like the air pressure dropping before a storm breaks. The hushed conversations near the installations grew quieter. The assistant straightened near the entrance, her professional demeanor replaced with something sharper, more alert. Even the music seemed to quiet, though I knew that was impossible. Then the glass doors opened. 4 men entered, but only one commanded the space. He was tall, easily 6'3", with dark hair slicked back from a face that belonged on a classical statue. Sharp eyes, defined jaw. Olive complexion that caught the gallery light and turned it into something dangerous. His black suit fit him with the precision that came from Italian tailoring and serious money. Every line emphasized broad shoulders and a lean, powerful build. But it wasn't his appearance that made my breath catch in my throat. It was the way everyone else reacted. The assistant moved immediately toward him without being summoned. The other collectors subtly adjusted their positions, creating space. Even the server with the champagne tray altered her route to avoid crossing his path. The two men flanking him, one silver-haired and distinguished, the other younger with sharp, calculating eyes, scanned the room with professional precision. I recognized the dynamic instantly. This wasn't wealth. This was power. The dangerous kind. I should have moved. Should have set down the champagne, collected my blazer, and left through the side exit like any sensible person would. But I was frozen, watching as he moved through the gallery with predatory grace, his dark eyes surveying the artwork with casual disinterest. He wasn't here for the art, and in the next 5 seconds I would make the mistake that would change everything. Then his gaze swept past me, stopped, returned, and locked onto mine. For 3 heartbeats, we stared at each other across the gallery. His expression was unreadable, but something in his eyes made my survival instincts scream. I broke eye contact first, turning toward the Richter piece with forced casualness, pretending to study the layered brushstrokes. My pulse hammered in my ears. "Walk away," my mind commanded. "Just walk away." I reached for a catalog on the nearby pedestal, and my sleeve rode up. Just an inch, maybe less, but it was enough. I felt his presence before I heard him, that shift in the air that comes when someone dangerous moves into your space. The silver-haired man and the younger operative flanked me on either side, blocking any escape route. And then he was there, directly in front of me, close enough that I could smell expensive cologne and something darker underneath. "Excuse me," I started, but the words died in my throat. His hand shot out and caught my wrist. The catalog clattered to the floor. Around us, conversations stopped mid-sentence. Even the ambient music seemed to fade into background noise. He turned my hand slowly, deliberately, exposing the tattoo under the gallery's harsh spotlight. His fingers were warm against my skin, his grip iron. I watched the color drain from his face as he stared at the compass rose, at the religious symbols, at every intricate detail that matched, according to his reaction, the mark his dead wife had borne. "No," he whispered, and it sounded like a prayer and a threat simultaneously. "No, this isn't possible." I tried to pull my wrist back. His grip tightened. "Let me go," I said, but my voice came out weak, terrified. His thumb pressed against the tattoo, tracing the raised edges of the brand like he was trying to confirm it was real, like he was trying to resurrect the dead through it. "My wife, Stephanie," he said, his voice dropping to something lethal, something that made the 2 men beside me tense, had this identical mark down to every curved line and symbol. And someone murdered her 3 months ago for what she knew about it. The gallery had gone completely silent. Every eye was on us. He leaned closer, and I could see the grief and rage warring in his dark eyes. When he spoke again, his words were precise, measured, and absolutely terrifying. "So you're going to tell me right now? Who are you really? And why are you walking around Manhattan wearing my dead wife's brand?" My past had finally caught up with me, and this time, there was nowhere left to run. What I was about to discover in the next hour would reveal that Stephanie's murder was just the beginning. The conspiracy she'd been investigating went deeper than anyone imagined, and I was the key to exposing all of it. The penthouse occupied the entire 42nd floor of a building that probably cost more than most small countries. Marshall Baker hadn't asked if I wanted to come. His security team had simply escorted me through the gallery's back entrance into a waiting black SUV, and 20 minutes later, I was standing in a space that looked like it had been designed to intimidate. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the Manhattan skyline. The furniture was all clean lines and dark leather. But it was the wall of photographs and documents in what should have been a dining room that made my blood run cold. "Stephanie's office," Marshall said, his voice still carrying that lethal edge from the gallery. Or what's left of it. I followed him into the room, my legs unsteady. The silver-haired man from the gallery, Derek Powell, Marshall had called him, stood near a bank of computer monitors, his posture relaxed but his eyes sharp. A younger man with Stephanie's same dark eyes and sharp cheekbones sat at a laptop, his fingers flying across the keyboard. Marshall picked up a manila folder from the desk. "My wife was killed 3 months ago. 2 bullets, execution style, in the parking garage of her office building." He opened the folder and pulled out crime scene photos. I forced myself to look. The woman in the photographs had been beautiful. Dark hair, delicate features, a face frozen in death. And there, visible on her left wrist in the harsh flash photography, was a tattoo. Not identical to mine, but similar. The same style, the same raised scarring, the same deliberate brutality in its application. "The police called it a robbery gone wrong," Marshall continued. "But they took her research materials, left her wallet, her jewelry, her phone. Just took the files she'd been working on for 6 months." He pulled out another stack of photographs. I had copies. Stephanie always made copies. My hands trembled as I looked through them. Survivor testimonies. Names I recognized from whispered conversations in dormitory darkness. Faces I'd seen in chapel pews and cafeteria lines. And photographs of tattoos. Dozens of them, each unique, each telling a story of ownership and categorization that made me want to vomit. "St. Magdalene's Reform Institute," I whispered, seeing the name in Stephanie's meticulous notes. "You know it." It wasn't a question. I nodded, unable to speak. Derek moved closer, his voice professionally neutral. Mrs. Baker was compiling a database of survivors. She'd identified 17 women with similar brands, all from the same institution. She believed there was a trafficking operation, something called the Sanctum, using religious cover to move children. The truth was worse than that. But I wouldn't learn how much worse until we decoded Stephanie's final message. A children's rhyme that would lead us to the vault where the Sanctum kept decades of evidence. The younger man looked up from his laptop. "I'm Gerald Garcia, Stephanie's brother." His voice cracked slightly on her name. Her last text message to me was sent the night she died. She said she'd found Subject 47. The room tilted. I gripped the edge of the desk. "That's you, isn't it?" Marshall's eyes bored into mine. "Subject 47. That was your designation." I couldn't breathe. Couldn't think. 15 years of careful distance, of building walls between Sarah Smothers, the curator, and Cecilia Hartman, the branded child, and it had all collapsed in a single evening. "She died looking for you," Marshall said quietly. "Which means you're not just a witness to whatever this is. You're a key to it." Gerald pulled up a document on his screen. "Stephanie's notes mention 3 names from your intake group: Cecilia, Lucia, and Agnes. She'd found Lucia, dead by apparent suicide 2 years ago. Agnes disappeared completely. But Cecilia..." He looked at me. "She changed her name, got a doctorate, became invisible." "Until tonight," Derek added. Marshall set down the photographs and leaned against the desk, his powerful frame somehow both threatening and exhausted. "So here's what's going to happen, Sarah, or Cecilia, or Subject 47 or whatever name you're using to hide. You're going to tell me everything you remember about St. Magdalene's, every detail about the Sanctum, every face, every name, every piece of this conspiracy that got my wife murdered. And if I refuse?" My voice was barely audible. His smile was cold. "Then you're walking around with a target on your wrist, just like Stephanie did." The people who killed her know you exist now. They saw us together at the gallery. He paused, letting that sink in. Your choice is simple. Trust me, and maybe survive. Or walk out that door and wait for them to find you. I looked at Stephanie's face in the crime scene photos, at the tattoo on her wrist, at the wall of evidence representing 6 months of investigation that had gotten her killed. I wasn't just a key to the conspiracy. I was next. If this moment hit you the way it hit me while writing it, take a second to subscribe. It tells me you want more stories like this, and it truly helps me keep making them. Comment where you're watching from, and tell me, would you have walked out that door, or would you have stayed to fight a system that brands children like merchandise? Because what happens next will show you exactly how deep this conspiracy goes. Marshall's estate was in Westchester, a sprawling property hidden behind stone walls and security gates that probably cost more than my annual salary. I'd been given a guest room on the 2nd floor, luxurious, pristine, and locked from the outside. Not a prisoner, Marshall had said. Protected. The distinction felt academic when Derek stationed himself in the hallway. For 3 days, we lived in Stephanie's research. Marshall's tech expert, a nervous woman named Chen, worked through encryption layers while I sat at the dining room table surrounded by printouts and photographs. Gerald brought coffee at irregular intervals, his grief manifesting as manic productivity. On the 4th day, Chen broke through the final security protocol. Audio files, she announced, her fingers trembling slightly on the keyboard. Interviews, dozens of them. Marshall moved to stand behind her chair. I stayed frozen at the table, knowing what was coming but unable to stop it. The first voice that emerged from the speakers was Stephanie's. Warm, professional, carefully gentle. Thank you for agreeing to talk with me. Can you tell me your name? Lucia Martinez. The second voice was hollow, damaged. They called me Subject 23, the Lily designation. I closed my eyes. Lucia. We'd shared a dormitory room for 2 years before they separated us. What Stephanie had recorded in those interviews would break me seeing. But it would also give us the clue we needed to find the sanctum's hidden vault, and the evidence that could destroy them. For the next 6 hours, we listened to ghosts. Stephanie had interviewed 9 survivors before her death. Each one described the same nightmare with different details. The intake process, the branding ceremonies, the careful categorization. And threaded through every testimony was the same institutional name: St. Magdalene's Reform Institute for Wayward Girls. When my childhood name, Cecilia, emerged from the speakers in Lucia's broken voice, describing our intake group of 3, I had to leave the room. Marshall found me on the terrace 20 minutes later, my hands gripping the stone railing hard enough to hurt. Tell me, he said quietly. So I did. The words came out fragmented, disjointed. The way memory works when it's been buried for 15 years. I described the chapel basement with its stone walls and single light bulb. Matron Deborah's clinical efficiency as she prepared the branding iron. The way Director Robinson would bring interested parties to observe us during meals, their eyes calculating our worth like we were livestock at auction. Marshall listened without interruption, his knuckles white where he gripped the railing beside me. When I finished, his voice was rough. Stephanie went through this. She endured this, and I never knew the full extent of it. She was trying to protect you from it, I said. Or she was trying to protect herself. His jaw clenched. I should have pushed harder, asked more questions. Maybe she'd still be alive. Gerald appeared in the doorway. You need to see this. We followed him back inside, where Chen had pulled up a document on the main monitor. It was handwritten, Stephanie's careful script on lined paper, photographed and saved. At the top, she'd written, Rhyme from Agnes. Says they made the children memorize it during intake. Below that, in careful block letters, 7 stones beneath the morning star, where angels weep and sinners are. The shepherd counts his flock by night and marks the lambs for holy rite. It's a riddle, I said, the words triggering something in my memory. They made us recite it every morning during prayers. I thought it was just another twisted religious verse. Marshall leaned forward. Stephanie was trying to decode this. Look at her notes in the margin. Stephanie's annotations covered the page. 7 stones equals physical location. Morning star equals Lucifer/institutional symbolism. Shepherd equals Robinson. She believed it was directions, Gerald said. A map to something hidden at St. Magdalene's. I read the verse again, and suddenly I was 12 years old, standing in the chapel with the other girls, reciting words we didn't understand, while Matron Deborah watched with cold satisfaction. 7 stones beneath the morning star, I whispered. The chapel had a mosaic floor. Stars and angels. There was a pattern near the altar. Marshall's eyes met mine. A pattern of 7 stones. Where they kept the records, I said, certainty flooding through me. It has to be. That's where Robinson would take the interested parties after the initial viewing. Down below, where they could review the full documentation. But we weren't the only ones who'd figured it out. The sanctum was watching us, and they were about to make their move. Derek appeared in the doorway, his phone in hand. We have a problem. Chen's security protocols just flagged an intrusion attempt. Someone's trying to access Stephanie's files remotely. Can you trace it? Marshall demanded. Already did. The IP address routes through several proxies, but the origin point is a government server. Congressional office building. The room went silent. They know we have the files, Gerald said quietly. Which means they know we're looking. Marshall's expression hardened. Then we move faster. Chen, make copies of everything, physical and digital. Multiple redundancies. He turned to me. This informant Stephanie mentioned in her notes. Clifford Gibbs, former maintenance worker at St. Magdalene's. Can you find him? Gerald was already typing. Last known address is in Queens, but according to this, he's been off the grid for 2 years. Find him, Marshall ordered. Whatever it takes. If he worked there, he saw things. He knows things. His gaze shifted to me. And if Stephanie trusted him enough to list him as a source, he might be our only shot at confirming what's hidden in that chapel before they realize we're coming. I looked at the rhyme on the screen, at Stephanie's desperate annotations, at the web of evidence she died trying to expose. Somewhere beneath St. Magdalene's abandoned buildings, there were answers, records, proof. And the sanctum knew we were hunting for it. What we didn't know was that our next move would get someone killed, and the clock was already ticking. The bar in Queens was the kind of place where people went to disappear. Neon beer signs fought against the dim interior, and the bartender didn't look up when we entered. Marshall had left most of his security team outside, bringing only Derek and Gerald. Too many armed men would spook their target. Clifford Gibbs sat in the back corner booth, exactly where Gerald's street informants said he'd be. He was perhaps 60, with the weathered face and trembling hands of a long-term alcoholic. When he saw us approaching, he started to stand. Sit, Marshall said, sliding into the booth across from him. I sat beside Marshall while Derek positioned himself near the exit. Gerald remained standing, his eyes scanning the room. You're Baker, Clifford said, his voice hoarse. Stephanie's husband. She said you might come looking. Before or after they killed her? Clifford flinched. Before. She came to see me 6 times. Said if anything happened to her, you'd finish what she started. His bloodshot eyes found mine. You're one of them. The branded ones. I can always tell. You all have that same look. What look? I asked. Like you're waiting for the next bad thing. He drained his whiskey glass. I worked maintenance at St. Magdalene's for 12 years. Longest 12 years of my life. Every time I close my eyes, I see those kids' faces. Then tell us what you saw, Marshall said. Clifford signaled the bartender for another drink. It wasn't a reform school. That was just the cover. Director Robinson ran a trafficking operation so sophisticated it took me 3 years to understand what I was seeing. The buyers would receive these portfolios, looked like religious art catalogs. Renaissance paintings, medieval illuminations, that sort of thing. Except every piece was encoded. Specific saints meant specific ages. Colors were gender markers. The symbols? Told them what the child was designated for. I finished. He nodded. The tattoos were permanent inventory marks. Each one unique, each one telling buyers exactly what they were purchasing. Smart kids got navigator compasses. Pretty ones got roses or lilies. The ones marked with crosses and keys. He didn't finish. He didn't have to. Senator Bradford Hodges, Marshall said. It wasn't a question. Clifford's hands shook harder. Major donor, frequent visitor. He had specific preferences. Always wanted the sharp ones, the kids who could keep secrets and follow instructions. Messengers, they called them. Robinson would hold special viewings for Hodges in his private office. Gerald pulled out his phone, showing Clifford a photograph. Stephanie Garcia. Did you see her? Subject 31. Yeah, I remember her. 13 years old when Hodges took delivery. She fought like hell, broke a guard's nose during the transfer. He looked at Marshall. Your wife was brave even then. Most kids went quiet after the branding. Not her. Marshall's jaw clenched, but his voice remained steady. You told Stephanie that Robinson kept records. Where? That's the thing, Clifford said, accepting his fresh drink from the bartender. Robinson's paranoid. Been running this operation since the 80s, maybe longer. He knows that proof is power, that documentation is insurance. So he kept everything. Intake files, buyer profiles, transaction ledgers, photographs. All of it stored in a vault beneath the chapel. I helped install the climate control system down there in '98. Temperature regulated, humidity controlled, built to preserve documents for decades. The chapel's been abandoned for 15 years, I said. The institute's been abandoned. That vault is still active. Robinson has people check on it monthly. He's got protection at every level. Police chiefs, judges, social workers. That's how the sanctum stayed hidden so long. Every person who might have uncovered it was either bought or silenced. Clifford didn't know it yet, but he'd just signed his own death warrant. The sanctum's cleanup crew was already on their way. 2 men entered the bar. Young, fit, moving with purpose. Their eyes swept the room and locked onto our booth. Derek saw them the same moment I did. Marshall. We were moving before they reached for their weapons. Derek grabbed Clifford and hauled him toward the back exit while Gerald covered our retreat. Marshall's hand closed around my wrist, pulling me through the kitchen as gunfire erupted behind us. The alley was narrow, filled with dumpsters and cooking grease. Marshall's backup team, 3 men in tactical gear, had the SUV running. We were 10 feet from safety when one of the shooters appeared in the kitchen doorway. Clifford stumbled, blood blooming across his chest. Gerald caught him as he fell, dragging him the last few feet to the vehicle. We piled inside as bullets sparked off the SUV's armored exterior. Drive, Marshall shouted. The SUV accelerated, throwing me against the seat. Gerald was applying pressure to Clifford's wound, but the old man's breathing was already shallow, rattling. Clifford, I said, leaning close. The vault. How do we access it? His eyes were unfocused, but he grabbed my hand with surprising strength. 7 stones, The rhyme. It's not just directions. He coughed, blood flecking his lips. Robinson keeps everything. Beneath the altar. Insurance policy against his buyers. If they ever turn on him. Clifford, stay with us, Gerald urged. But Clifford's grip was weakening. Tell everyone, what he did to those kids. Make them pay. His hand went slack. Gerald checked for a pulse, then shook his head. The SUV went silent except for the sound of tires on wet pavement and my own ragged breathing. I looked down at my wrist, at the tattoo that marked me as navigator, and understood something Stephanie must have realized before she died. We weren't just hunting the sanctum. The sanctum was hunting us. And Clifford Gibbs had just become the second person to die for trying to expose Director Robinson's secrets. The body count was rising. But what we were about to uncover in that vault would make every sacrifice worth it, and reveal that the sanctum's network went higher than anyone imagined. We returned to Marshall's estate under cover of darkness. Clifford's blood still stained Gerald's jacket. The old man's body had been left at a hospital with an anonymous tip. We couldn't risk Marshall's team being connected to another death while the sanctum was actively hunting us. Chen had the command center lit up like a war room. Every monitor displayed a different piece of Stephanie's research. Photographs of tattoos, scanned documents, encrypted files. I stood in front of the main screen, staring at the religious art portfolios Clifford had described, while Marshall poured himself 3 fingers of scotch. "Walk me through it," he said. I pulled up the first image, a Renaissance painting of St. Catherine. Catholic iconography. Every element means something. St. Catherine was a young martyr, which would indicate... I felt sick. Children under 12. The wheel beside her represents the torture instrument, but in this context, it's probably an age marker. Spokes on the wheel could indicate specific years. Gerald brought up another image. Saint Sebastian, multiple arrows. Older children, early teens. The arrows represent... I couldn't say it. Didn't need to. The implication was horrifying enough. For the next 3 hours, I decoded Stephanie's research using my art history training. The system was brilliantly disguised as a legitimate art catalog. To anyone without the cipher, it would look like a collection of medieval and Renaissance religious works. But with the key, each painting became a detailed product listing. "This one," I said, pulling up a circular mandala decorated with a compass rose. "This is mine, the navigator designation." Marshall moved closer, studying the image. "What does it mean?" "High intelligence, pattern recognition, problem-solving abilities." The words tasted like ash. Children marked as navigators were designated for buyers who wanted future assets, kids they could groom and control, who would eventually become valuable in professional settings. Corporate espionage, financial analysis, intelligence work. They were creating sleeper agents, Gerald said quietly. Or very expensive personal assistants. I pulled up my file from Stephanie's research. Subject 47, Cecilia Hartman. IQ tested at 142. Photographic memory. Multilingual potential. I had to stop, my throat closing. They were going to sell me to someone who would mold me into whatever tool they needed. Marshall's hand found my shoulder, steadying. "But you escaped." "During a transfer. I was 14. They were moving me from St. Magdalene's to a secondary location for final buyer delivery. The van stopped at a rest area, and I ran." I'd never told anyone this story. I hid in a truck stop bathroom for 6 hours before a waitress took pity on me. She bought me a bus ticket to New York and told me to disappear. So I did. "And they've been looking for you ever since," Derek said from the doorway. "That's why you're still marked for retrieval. Someone paid for Subject 47 and never received delivery. And when we accessed that vault, I would finally learn who had purchased me. The buyer who'd paid a fortune for a 12-year-old girl he could shape into the perfect weapon. I felt Marshall tense beside me. Who? Which buyer? I pulled up another document from Stephanie's files. She didn't know, but she was close to finding out when she died. Gerald leaned forward. Pull up her tattoo analysis. The messenger designation. I did. The image showed a stylized envelope intertwined with keys and crosses. Stephanie's mark. Beside it, Stephanie had written extensive notes about what the designation meant. Children with calm demeanor, good memory, ability to follow complex instructions, useful for buyers with political connections who needed secure communications. She was Hodges's messenger, Marshall said, his voice hollow. Clifford confirmed it. Hodges purchased her when she was 13 and used her as a courier for illegal campaign contributions, I added, reading Stephanie's own notes. She would carry money, documents, messages that Hodges couldn't risk sending through traceable channels. She did this until she was 18, when she aged out of his usefulness. But she remembered everything, Gerald said. Every drop-off location, every recipient, every amount. And when she started investigating the sanctum as an adult, she wasn't just hunting the institution, Marshall finished. She was hunting the man who bought her. The man who still had enough power to order her execution when she got too close. I pulled up the final piece of evidence, Stephanie's last research note, dated 2 days before her murder. Confirmed, BH active buyer 1992 present. Purchased minimum 7 subjects. Current political position provides protection. Must secure vault evidence before approaching. BH, Derek said. Bradford Hodges. A sitting United States Senator, Gerald added. No wonder she was killed. She had enough information to destroy him, but she needed the physical proof from St. Magdalene's vault to make it stick. Marshall drained his scotch. Then we get the proof. We go to St. Magdalene's, we access that vault, and we finish what Stephanie started. It's a trap, Derek warned. They know we're coming. The moment we step foot on that property, they'll be waiting. Good, Marshall said, and his smile was savage. Let them wait. Let them think they have the advantage, because they don't know what I'm willing to sacrifice to get justice for my wife. He turned to me. That rhyme, 7 stones beneath the morning star. You said there was a pattern in the chapel floor? I nodded. A mosaic, stars and angels surrounding the altar. One of the constellations had 7 stones forming the pattern. Then that's our access point. Marshall pulled up a satellite image of St. Magdalene's. We go in fast, we go in hard, and we don't leave until we have every piece of evidence in that vault. Derek, assemble your best team. Gerald, make copies of everything we have and store them off-site. If this goes sideways, I want the world to know what we found. He looked at me. You don't have to come. You've already given us more than enough. No, I said. The word came out stronger than I expected. I'm coming. Stephanie died hunting these people. Clifford died helping us. And somewhere in that vault is the documentation that proves what was done to me, to Lucia, to Agnes, to all of us. I touched my tattoo. I need to see it. I need to know who was willing to pay for Subject 47. And then I need to watch the sanctum burn. Marshall held my gaze for a long moment, then nodded. Tomorrow night, we returned to St. Magdalene's. The hunt was no longer about investigation. It was about vengeance. And I discovered I was ready for it. If you're still watching, you're invested in this fight. Against a system that brands children. Against institutions that enable predators. Against the silence that protects monsters like Director Robinson and Senator Hodges. This is exactly why stories like this matter. Hit that subscribe button if you believe survivors deserve justice. Drop a comment telling me, What would you do if you discovered a conspiracy this massive? Because what happens next at St. Magdalen's will test every character's limits, and the truth we uncover will shake you. The drive upstate took 3 hours. Marshall's tactical team, 6 men including Derek, traveled in 2 vehicles, armed with enough firepower to start a small war. I sat in the back of the lead SUV, watching the landscape transform from urban sprawl to dense forest as we approached the coordinates Gerald had pulled from property records. St. Magdalen's Reform Institute appeared through the trees like something from a nightmare. Gothic stone buildings ringed by iron fencing, overgrown with 15 years of neglect. The main gate hung broken on its hinges. Graffiti covered the entrance archway, and vegetation had reclaimed much of the grounds. But the bones of the institution remained. Cold, imposing, malevolent. My chest tightened as we approached. The panic attack hit without warning, my vision narrowing to a tunnel, my breathing shallow and rapid. I was 12 years old again, being processed through intake, Matron Deborah's cold hands examining me like merchandise. Sarah, Marshall's voice cut through the panic. His hand closed around mine, grounding. Breathe with me. In for 4. Hold for 4. Out for 4. I followed his rhythm, focusing on the warmth of his hand. The present moment instead of the past. Slowly, my breathing steadied. You can stay in the vehicle, he said quietly. No one would think less of you. No. My voice was shaky but determined. I need to do this. What I would find beneath that chapel would finally give me answers, but it would also put me face to face with the woman who'd branded me, and the man who'd ordered Stephanie's execution. Derek and his team were already securing the perimeter, moving through the overgrown grounds with tactical precision. Gerald stayed close to me as we entered through the broken main gates. The buildings were in worse shape than I remembered. Roofs collapsed, windows shattered, walls crumbling. Nature was slowly devouring the institution that had destroyed so many lives. But I navigated the ruins with terrible accuracy, my body remembering what my mind had tried to forget. The dormitory building where I'd spent 3 years. The cafeteria where we'd eaten in silence while staff watched for infractions. The administrative offices where Director Robinson had conducted his business. And there, at the center of the compound, the chapel. It stood alone, a stone structure with a peaked roof and stained glass windows. Most of them broken now, leaving jagged teeth of colored glass. The double doors hung askew. Inside, debris covered the floor. Broken pews, water damage, graffiti covering the walls. But the altar remained. A massive stone structure at the far end, and beneath it, the mosaic floor. I approached slowly, Marshall staying close. The mosaic was damaged, many tiles missing or cracked, but the pattern was still visible. Angels and stars surrounding the altar in concentric circles. And there, just as I remembered, a constellation of 7 larger stones forming a distinct pattern. 7 stones beneath the morning star, I whispered, kneeling beside the altar. Where angels weep and sinners are. Derek's team moved the altar carefully. It took 4 men to shift the heavy stone enough to expose the floor beneath. The 7 stones were loose, as if designed to be removed. We lifted them one by one and revealed a stone staircase descending into darkness. Cold air drifted up from below, carrying the scent of recycled air and electronics. The vault was still active. Marshall clicked on a tactical flashlight. Derek, you and 2 men stay topside. Watch for company. Gerald, you're with us. He looked at me. Last chance to stay behind. I was already moving toward the stairs. Not a chance. The descent felt like traveling back through time. Each step took us deeper into the earth, deeper into the past, deeper into the horror I'd spent 15 years trying to escape. The staircase ended at a steel door, modern, expensive, completely at odds with the Gothic architecture above. Gerald pulled out a device from his pack. Electronic lock. Give me 2 minutes. While he worked, I pressed my hand against the cold metal door. Behind it lay the evidence. The proof of what had been done to me, to Stephanie, to hundreds of children over decades. The documentation that would either vindicate Stephanie's investigation or die with us in this underground vault. Got it, Gerald said as the lock clicked open. Marshall pushed the door open and we entered the vault. What we found inside would be worse than any of us imagined. Decades of crimes, meticulously documented, and we were about to come face to face with the architects of it all. The space beyond was impossibly pristine, temperature-controlled, humidity-regulated, humming with the quiet efficiency of maintained technology. Filing cabinets lined the walls in neat rows, each labeled with years and designation codes. Computer servers occupied one corner, their lights blinking in the darkness. This wasn't an abandoned archive. This was an active, operational database. I moved to the nearest filing cabinet, my hands trembling as I pulled open drawers. Manila folders organized by subject number. I found mine almost immediately. Subject 47, Cecilia Hartman. Navigator designation. The file was thick. Intake documentation from when I was 7 years old. My orphan status, my test scores, my psychological evaluation. Photographs of me at various ages. Medical records. And then the buyer documentation. A list of interested parties, with bid amounts beside each name. The highest bidder was redacted, but the final notation was clear. Acquisition prevented. Subject escaped during transfer. Marked for retrieval. Bounty active. They're still looking for me, I said, my voice hollow. After 15 years, there's still a bounty. Marshall was at the computer servers, Gerald already connecting equipment to copy the hard drives. How many files are here? I looked around the vault, calculating. Hundreds, maybe thousands. Decades of operations. Derek's voice crackled through Marshall's earpiece. We've got company. Multiple vehicles approaching from the access road. At least 12 men. You need to move. How long until the drives are copied? Marshall demanded. 10 minutes minimum, Gerald said, his fingers flying across the keyboard. We don't have 10 minutes. The sound of engines grew louder. I grabbed specific files, the ones marked with dates around Stephanie's time at the Institute, the ones with Senator Hodges' distinctive letterhead in the buyer documentation. Marshall was pulling ledgers from the cabinets, transaction records that detailed every sale. Then we heard footsteps on the stairs. The moment we'd been racing toward had arrived. Director Robinson was coming, and he was bringing Senator Hodges with him. The final confrontation was about to begin. Marshall positioned himself near the door, weapon drawn. I moved behind a filing cabinet, clutching the files I'd grabbed. Gerald continued copying data, racing against time. The vault door swung open. Director Russell Robinson entered flanked by 4 armed men, and behind him, moving with the careful dignity of power, Senator Bradford Hodges. Robinson was in his 70s, but his eyes were sharp, predatory. He smiled when he saw me. Cecilia, Subject 47. His voice was warm, grandfatherly, obscene. You were always one of our most promising products. Such a shame you ran away before your buyer could collect. He paid quite a lot for you. Senator Hodges remained silent, his face carefully blank, but I saw his eyes flick to the files in my hands. You killed my wife, Marshall said, his weapon steady on Robinson. I did. Robinson's admission was casual, almost proud. Mrs. Garcia, Stephanie, Subject 31, one of our finest messengers, refused to be reasonable. I offered her a very generous settlement, enough money to disappear, to forget what she'd learned, to live comfortably for the rest of her life. But she was too idealistic, too determined to expose decades of successful business. Business, I spat. You call trafficking children business? I call it serving a market. Robinson moved deeper into the vault. For 40 years, the Sanctum has operated in 7 states, with protection at every level of government and law enforcement. Judges who look the other way, police chiefs who lose evidence, social workers who feed us product. We've placed hundreds of children with buyers who could appreciate their unique qualities. Senator Hodges finally spoke, his voice flat. You should have taken the deal, Mrs. Garcia. Your death was unnecessary. Marshall's rage was barely controlled. You bought my wife when she was 13, used her as your personal courier for illegal campaign contributions. And when she got too close to exposing you, you had her murdered. I protected my interests, Hodges said simply, as any smart businessman would. The other armed men had positioned themselves around the vault. We were outnumbered, outgunned, and trapped underground. Robinson smiled at our tactical disadvantage. Now, he said pleasantly, you're going to give me those files, Mr. Garcia is going to stop copying my servers, and we're all going to have a reasonable conversation about. But Robinson didn't know about the vault's sprinkler system. He didn't know about the electrical panel. And he definitely didn't know that I was about to destroy 40 years of evidence, while making sure the most important pieces survived. I noticed it then. The vault's sprinkler system, clearly visible on the ceiling. The electrical panel near the door, its warning labels bright against the metal. And Marshall's eyes meeting mine, understanding passing between us in a fraction of a second. I lunged for the panel. The fire alarm's shriek was deafening in the confined space. Sprinklers activated immediately, raining water down on decades of carefully preserved documentation. Lights began to strobe. In the chaos, Marshall moved. His first shot took down the guard nearest Robinson. Derek and his team must have heard the alarm because gunfire erupted from the stairwell as they engaged Robinson's backup force. The vault descended into chaos, water pouring down, lights strobing. Close quarters combat in tight spaces between filing cabinets. I ran to the cabinets, grabbing specific ledgers, the buyer registries, the financial records with Senator Hodges' name prominently featured. Gerald shielded me, his weapon drawn as he yanked the portable hard drive free from the server. Got it, he shouted over the alarm. We need to move. Robinson tried to stop me, his grandfatherly demeanor evaporating into cold fury. We struggled, him trying to rip the ledgers from my hands while I fought with feral desperation. Then she appeared from behind a filing cabinet, Matron Deborah. She was elderly now, but her eyes held the same cruel intelligence I remembered. Subject 47, she said, reaching for me. You always were trouble. This was the woman who'd branded me, who'd held me down while I screamed, and I was about to show her exactly what Subject 47 had become. Something inside me snapped. I was no longer the terrified 12-year-old girl she'd branded. I slammed the ledgers into her face, then shoved her backward into a filing cabinet. She went down hard, and I stood over her, water streaming down my face. My name is Sarah, I said, and you'll never brand another child. Marshall had Senator Hodges cornered near the servers. Hodges pulled a concealed weapon, a small pistol that looked almost ridiculous in his politician's hands. He fired. The shot went wide, sparking off metal. Marshall didn't miss. Hodges crumpled, and Marshall stood over him with the cold satisfaction of a man who'd just avenged his wife's murder. Everyone out! Derek's voice came through the earpiece. Building's compromised. Move now! We ran. Gerald led the way, clutching the hard drive. I followed with the ledgers pressed against my chest. Marshall covered our retreat, exchanging fire with Robinson's remaining security force. The vault was flooding now, the sprinkler system overwhelmed, water rising around our ankles. Robinson stood in the doorway, blocking our exit. You think this changes anything? The Sanctum is bigger than one location, bigger than Senator Hodges. We have operations across the country, buyers in every major city. Not anymore, I said. and pushed past him. We emerged from the stairwell to find Derek's team had secured the chapel. Robinson's backup force lay disarmed and zip-tied. Police sirens wailed in the distance. Gerald had triggered the emergency call before we'd entered the vault. Marshall grabbed my arm. "We need to be gone before they arrive. Can't have my team connected to this scene." "No," I said. "We stay. This ends now. All of it." And in the next 72 hours, the world would learn the truth about the sanctum. The arrests would be international news. And I would finally become the weapon Stephanie had hoped for, not branded for someone else's use, but forged by my own survival. The FBI raid of St. Magdalene's made national news within 3 hours. By morning, every major network was running the story. Decades-long child trafficking conspiracy, dead senator, prominent director arrested. The files I'd grabbed from the vault, combined with Gerald's complete copy of the server data, provided overwhelming evidence. Dozens of names, hundreds of transactions, years of meticulous documentation. Senator Bradford Hodges was dead. Director Russell Robinson was arrested on site, charged with trafficking, conspiracy, and the murder of Stephanie Garcia. The evidence was irrefutable. His own files condemned him. Matron Deborah and 12 other Institute staff members were taken into custody. Within 48 hours, federal raids targeted sanctum operations in 6 other states. 7 children currently held in the network were recovered. The buyers began falling like dominoes as investigators worked through the ledgers. Corporate executives, politicians, entertainment industry figures, all of them documented in Robinson's paranoid insurance policy. I stood at Stephanie's grave 3 days later. News helicopters circled overhead, but Marshall's security team kept them at a distance. The headstone was simple. Stephanie Garcia, 1989-2025. She fought for the voiceless. Marshall knelt and placed a photograph on the headstone. It showed Stephanie's messenger tattoo with a red line slashed through it. "She's free now," he said quietly. I touched my own tattoo, the navigator mark that had defined me for so long. "We'll find every single one of them. Every buyer, every facilitator, every child still trapped in what remains of the sanctum. Stephanie started this. We'll finish it." Marshall stood, his grief evident but controlled. "I'll give you everything. My resources, my people, my money. Whatever you need to hunt them down." I met his eyes. I was no longer the terrified woman he'd confronted in the gallery. "I need the sanctum burned to ashes. Every franchise, every operation, every person who knew and did nothing. I need them all to pay." "Then that's what we'll do." The investigation was far from over. The evidence from St. Magdalene's had revealed a network far more extensive than even Stephanie had realized. Operations in multiple countries. Buyers with international connections. A franchise system that had operated for decades, adapting and evolving to avoid detection. But now we had the blueprint. We had the names. And we had the resources to hunt them systematically. As we walked back to the waiting vehicles, I rolled up my sleeve, leaving my tattoo visible. No more hiding. No more shame. The navigator mark would become something new. A badge of survival. A declaration of war against everyone who'd thought they could buy, brand, and break children without consequence. Stephanie had started the hunt. Marshall had provided the means, and I would be the weapon that finished it. The sanctum's reign of terror was ending. We would make sure of it. But the real battle was just beginning, because what came next would transform me from a survivor into a crusader. And the foundation we built would hunt predators across the globe. 6 months later, I walked into the congressional hearing room with my tattoo clearly visible. No long sleeves, no concealing makeup, just the truth, branded into my skin for everyone to see. The Stephanie Garcia Foundation had become a national force. Marshall's resources funded sophisticated intelligence operations. My testimony had sparked federal investigations in multiple states. We'd identified 3 more Sanctum-connected operations, exposed buyer networks in 2 countries, and located 14 more survivors who'd been offered support and protection. The hearing room was packed. Politicians, journalists, survivor advocates, and representatives from law enforcement agencies that had failed to protect children for decades. I took my seat at the witness table, my prepared statement organized in front of me, but I knew I wouldn't need it. The truth needed no script. During the morning break, Marshall joined me on the courthouse steps. News cameras captured us together, the Mafia Boss and the survivor, an unlikely alliance that had become legendary in the 6 months since St. Magdalene's fall. "Stephanie would be proud of you," he said quietly. I shook my head. She'd be proud of us. This is her mission. We're just seeing it through. Gerald approached with the latest intelligence report. 3 more operations identified. Buyer networks spanning Europe and Asia. 14 more survivors located, offered support. Choosing to join the fight rather than hide in silence. The work was endless, brutal, traumatic. Every case we cracked revealed another layer of corruption, another network of predators, another generation of children who'd been branded and sold. But somewhere in the ashes of my past, I'd found purpose. I touched my tattoo one last time before returning to the hearing room. The navigator mark was no longer a symbol of ownership. It was a declaration of war against everyone who thought they could buy, brand, and break children without consequence. Against every system that had enabled the Sanctum to operate for decades. Against the silence that had protected predators and abandoned survivors. The hunt continued, and it would continue until every last cell of the Sanctum was burned to the ground. Every buyer was exposed, and every survivor found justice. Stephanie had started it with her investigation. Marshall had provided the resources to make it possible. And I would be the voice that ensured the world never forgot what had been done in the darkness of institutions like St. Magdalene's. As I took my seat before the congressional committee and prepared to testify, I met the eyes of the politicians who'd failed to protect children like me, like Stephanie, like the hundreds of others whose files had been found in that vault. "My name is Sarah Smothers," I began, "and I am Subject 47. The cameras flashed. The journalist leaned forward, and I told the truth that had been branded into my skin 15 years ago in a chapel basement while a woman named Matron Deborah whispered that God would always know his own. God wasn't the only one watching now. The world was listening, and the Sanctum would burn. If you felt something while watching, please subscribe. That's how I know these stories mean something to you, even on your TV. Take a second to join our community of story lovers. Your support keeps this world of emotions alive.